By the time the thermal energy has fully penetrated and tenderized the thick 6 mm pieces, the delicate 2 mm pieces have been exposed to heat for far too long.
They're just mush.
Their cellular structure has completely collapsed. When the assessor tastes the final super stew, they will get a mouthful of varying textures, some crunchy and raw, some completely disintegrated. It is a failure of execution.
Wow. Perfect. Uniform geometry guarantees perfect. Uniform thermodynamics. Every piece cooks at the exact same rate.
That's the whole point of the ruler.
And there is a vital operational detail regarding the waste generated by this geometry. When you take a round potato and cut the rounded edges off to make a perfect rectangle, you generate a lot of scraps.
Yes, you do.
The manual issues a strict mandate. Do not throw those scrap pieces into the garbage. You must keep them in a separate, clean bowl on your station.
Because an assessor is evaluating your understanding of food cost and kitchen economics.
It always comes back to money.
Always. In a commercial environment, profit margins are razor thin. Throwing away perfectly edible organic matter is essentially throwing cash straight into the trash. Those irregularly shaped scraps of carrot, celery, and onion are structurally imperfect, sure, but they still contain massive amounts of water-soluble flavor compounds.
So they become the foundation for stocks.
Yes. You save the scraps, roast them or sweat them, and submerge them in water to simmer. The water extracts the flavor, you strain out the mushy scraps, and you are left with a highly flavorful, valuable liquid asset.
A stock produced entirely from material that an amateur would have thrown away.
Exactly. It proves to the assessor that you practice zero waste, financially responsible cooking.
Okay, so we have mastered the physical geometry of the knight and the spatial organization of the board. Now we have to master the mathematical cheat codes of the kitchen.
The institutional ratios?
Yes. This circles back to our discussion on systems versus memorization. If you refuse to memorize the exact grams of every recipe, you must instead internalize the universal mathematical ratios that govern culinary formulas.
These ratios are literally the genetic code of cooking.
The documentation provides 3 foundational ratios that every candidate must know. The first is the Mirepoix ratio.
Ah, yes.
This is the aromatic vegetable base that is the starting point for almost all Western stocks, soups, braises, and sauces. The ratio is universally 2 parts onion, 1 part celery, and 1 part carrot.
And the beauty of this ratio is its scalability. Notice it uses the word parts, completely ignoring specific units of measurement like cups, pounds, or grams.
So a part could be anything.
Exactly. A part can be a tablespoon for a single serving, or it can be a 10-gallon bucket for an industrial banquet. As long as you maintain that 2-to-1-to-1 relationship, the sulfurous, pungent compounds of the onion will always perfectly balance the earthy, grassy notes of the celery and the sweet sugars of the carrot.
You never need a recipe for Mirepoix. You just need the ratio. The second ratio is the roux ratio, which is the foundational thickening agent we mentioned when discussing the mother sauces.
Right, equal parts.
A roux is always equal parts fat, typically butter and all-purpose flour. But the crucial distinction the manual makes is that it must be equal parts by weight, not by volume.
This is a classic trap for beginners.
Because cups aren't accurate.
Right. If you take 1 measuring cup of melted butter and 1 measuring cup of flour, you do not have equal amounts of matter. Flour is heavily aerated, it is mostly empty space. Butter is incredibly dense.
So if you mix them by volume,
you will have far too much fat and the roux will be greasy and unstable. When you measure by weight, say 100 grams of butter and 100 grams of flour, you ensure the correct chemical interaction.
what is actually happening when those 2 ingredients cook together, like chemically?
You are neutralizing the flour's tendency to clump. If you dump raw flour directly into hot stock, the exterior of the flour clumps instantly gelatinizes into a sticky shell, sealing dry, raw flour inside.
Ugh, you get massive inedible dumplings floating in your sauce.
Exactly. But in a roux, you are melting the butter and stirring the flour into it over heat. The liquid fat thoroughly coats every single microscopic starch granule in the flour with a waterproof lipid layer.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so when you eventually whisk your liquid into the pan, the fat slowly melts away, allowing the starch granules to hydrate and swell individually, perfectly evenly, without ever forming a lump.
Which naturally leads us to the third mathematical rule, the stock-to-roux ratio. This dictates exactly how much of that roux you need to thicken a liquid.
And the standard formula is 3 ounces of roux will thicken 1 quart of liquid to a standard light sauce consistency.
This is incredibly liberating math. Imagine the assessor demands a quart of turkey gravy. and you have no recipe. You don't panic. You know the end goal is 1 quart of liquid.
Therefore, your system dictates you need 3 ounces of roux.
Right. You divide that by 2, meaning you need 1.5 ounces of butter and 1.5 ounces of flour by weight. You melt the butter, whisk in the flour, cook it slightly, and vigorously whisk in your quart of turkey stock.
It's not culinary magic, it's just applied mathematics.
But this brings us to a fascinating and incredibly difficult paradox that candidates face during the exam, which we will call the solo diner paradox.
This is where so many people fail.
We have just established these grand ratios, how to make a quart of gravy, or how to use parts to make 10 gallons of mirepoix. But the TESDA assessment frequently hands candidates a menu and requires them to cook for exactly one person, a single portion.
And this is where many highly skilled cooks completely crash. They are accustomed to producing in bulk. Cooking for one person paradoxically requires totally different mechanics, entirely different thermodynamics, and a razor-thin margin for error compared to cooking for 50 people.
Before we tackle the math of scaling down, the manuals outline a strict protocol for the execution phase, the moment you are handed that recipe package and told to begin cooking.
Yeah, step 1 is project management.
You must take a deep breath and read the entire recipe package through twice before you are allowed to touch a burner or grab a knife.
You are essentially building a Gantt chart in your head. You have to identify the critical path of the timeline. If the menu includes a baked potato that takes an hour in the oven and a sautéed fish that takes 4 minutes on the stove, you cannot start prepping the fish first. You must initiate the longest duration task immediately and then nest the shorter tasks within that waiting period.
Step 2 is a relentless focus on sanitation, clean as you go. You cannot leave a mountain of soiled mixing bowls and dirty cutting boards piled up in the sink.
Assessors despise visual chaos. A cook who washes their whisk the second they are done using it is a cook who is in total control. It prevents cross-contamination and ensures that if you suddenly need that whisk again, it is ready for deployment.
Step 3 is sensory calibration. Taste your food constantly and always use a fresh, clean-tasting spoon. Never double dip.
Serving a dish that is radically under-seasoned or aggressively over-salted is an instant failure. The assessor cannot taste the food while it's in the pan. They rely on you to calibrate the sodium levels, the acidity, and the balance before it ever hits the plate. You must be your own harshest critic.
And step 4 brings us to the plating phase. Plate with absolute intent. Wipe the rims of the plates with a clean cloth so there are no stray fingerprints or drips of sauce.
It's all about presentation.
And crucially, manage the thermal state of your ceramics. Hot food must be plated on physically warmed plates, and cold dishes like salads must go on chilled plates.
This demonstrates to the assessor that you understand the vulnerability of the plated dish.
How so?
A beautifully rested, perfectly medium rare steak served on a room temperature ceramic plate is a disaster. Ceramic is a heat sink. It will aggressively draw the thermal energy right out of the meat, and within 60 seconds, the diner is eating cold beef and congealed fat.
Oh, this sounds awful.
It is. Warming the plate under a heat lamp protects the thermal integrity of the food on its journey to the diner.
So your timeline is set, your station is pristine, your plates are warming. Now you look at the actual menu package, and you have to confront the math of scaling a massive recipe down to a single diner. The documentation explicitly warns candidates against using straight mathematical division to solve this problem.
It is the most common mistake. A candidate looks at a standard banquet recipe meant for 20 people, and they mathematically divide every single ingredient by 20 on a calculator.
And you end up with complete absurdity. The math tells you to measure out 1/16 of an onion or 0.3 cloves of garlic.
It is physically impractical, and more importantly, organic ingredients do not scale linearly in flavor. A fraction of a garlic clove might provide 0 aromatic impact, whereas a full clove might overpower a small dish.
So what's the solution?
The expert solution is to abandon rigid calculator division and pivot to logical, modular culinary portions.
You allocate logical baseline units. For a single diner, the protein is usually 150 to 200 grams. The starch is 1 medium potato. You establish those physical anchors, and then you adjust the liquid and aromatic volumes around them.
You are building a micro batch based on intuition and fundamental ratios, not dividing a macro batch.
The challenge of the micro batch introduces a massive physical hurdle that the manuals call pan physics. When you are cooking for 50 people, you have huge vats of liquid that are incredibly thermally stable. When you're cooking for one person, you are dealing with shockingly small volumes of liquid.
This is where understanding thermodynamics is so critical. Let's say you are making a single portion of a pan sauce or a gravy. You are utilizing maybe a half cup or 120 milliliters of beef stock.
Right.
If you pour that half cup of liquid into a massive, wide 12-inch sauté pan, the liquid instantly spreads out into a paper-thin film across the hot metal.
The surface area to volume ratio completely inverts.
Exactly. Because it is spread so thin across a massive heat source, the evaporation rate goes exponential. That half cup of stock will hit a violent boil and evaporate into steam in a matter of seconds.
So your delicate sauce turns into a scorched, blackened crust of burnt flour and bitter protein stuck to the pan.
The total disaster.
So the mandate is clear. You must restrict your pan size. You have to actively select the absolute smallest saucepans and skillets available at your station for these micro batches.
Using a small 4-inch saucepan forces that half cup of liquid to pool deeply. It minimizes the surface area exposed to the air and the direct heat, dramatically slowing down the evaporation rate.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah, it allows you to simmer and reduce the sauce gently, extracting flavor without destroying the delicate emulsion. You have to match the geometry of the tool to the volume of the matter.
And managing these micro batches requires extreme efficiency in your physical movements, which brings us to the final pro tip from the manuals. Consolidated prep.
Yes.
It's about looking at the menu as an interconnected web rather than isolated dishes.
Because a beginner looks at the menu linearly, they see dish 1 requires a diced onion, so they dice an onion, cook dish 1, and wash their board. Then they look at dish 2, see it also requires an onion, so they pull out another onion, chop it, and cook dish 2.
It's totally redundant, and it shatters your workflow.
It wastes immense amounts of time and radically increases your exposure to cross-contamination every time you transition between a raw prep and the stove.
The professional approach is to scan the entire menu package during that initial reading phase. You identify every single dish that requires an onion.
Right.
You see the beef needs sliced onion, the soup needs minced onion, the side dish needs a brunoise. During your initial mise en place phase, you grab 1 or 2 large onions and you execute all of those cuts simultaneously.
You process the ingredient completely in one sitting, and you divide the different shapes into their specific ramekins, staged for the different dishes.
You're basically performing a time motion study on your own workflow.
Precisely. You touch the knife once, you touch the raw onion once, you clean the board once. When the cooking phase begins, it is nothing but a smooth, uninterrupted choreography of heat transfer. You are never stopping a hot pan to chop an aromatic.
It is incredible how deep this goes. We have traveled an enormous distance today. We started in a domestic kitchen, looking at a pot of boiled potatoes and realizing that the lack of a specific wire masher is actually an invitation to understand the cellular biology of starch.
Yeah, it's wild how it all connects.
We explored how blunt force preserves the integrity of the potato while the violent speed of a blender unleashes a polymeric disaster. And from that microscopic level, we zoomed out to dissect the psychological and physical rigors of a professional culinary exam.
Right, looking at everything from prep to plating.
We looked at the thermodynamics of knife cuts, the architectural history of the mother sauces, and the intense spatial geometry required to execute a micro batch of food for a single diner without scorching it into oblivion.
And the unifying thread connecting every single one of these concepts is the revelation that the secret to mastery in cooking or in any complex system really is understanding the underlying physical mechanisms.
Not just following instructions.
No. Exactly. Obsessing over a specific gadget or trying to robotically memorize the exact text of a written recipe is a fragile approach. It breaks the moment reality deviates from the plan.
So we want to leave you with a final perspective-shifting thought based on the immense depth of the culinary science we explored today.
If the temperature of a potato dictates how its starch cells react, if the geometry of a carrot dictates its thermal absorption, and if strict institutional ratios govern the viscosity of every sauce, then the written recipe itself is fundamentally an illusion.
Wait, an illusion.
Yeah. A recipe is not a sacred text. It is merely one specific, momentary expression of universal culinary mathematics. The next time you step into the kitchen, try to radically shift your mindset. Don't look at the page and ask, what does the recipe tell me to do? Look at the ingredients in front of you and ask yourself, what physical and chemical transformation am I actually trying to achieve?
Master the system, and you master the kitchen. And remember, the next time you open that drawer and realize you don't have a potato masher, don't panic. You already have absolutely everything you need.